worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love. show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Welcome back, church. Glad you can join us again this week. I hope you had a great week. We're continuing on in a series of talks on the subject of faith, what it means to have courageous faith, bold faith, strong faith. Where does it come from? Where do we get faith from? How can we get faith? Why do I need faith? I hope we know the answer to that. And so far we discovered that faith, contrary to what we might think, is actually, it comes from God. It's not something that we can kind of muster up on our own. It's not something that we can kind of say, well, I just got to have the faith, and you just kind of muscle through and conjure it up somehow. No, it's faith actually comes from God. And in the first couple of weeks ago, we learned that faith actually means persuasion. It's persuasion. It means the divine persuasion of God, and so it is actually a gift from God. Now we play a part in that, of course. We believe, that's our part. We have to believe that God exists and that He has the power to help us in that. But it actually comes from God. And then last week, Aaron talked about the fact that we're in it for the long haul. Faith isn't something that's here today and gone tomorrow. It's something that continues over time. And so this week we're going to look at the story of Moses, one of the greatest heroes of the faith, one of the greatest characters that through the Old Testament, of course, the law was given to Moses, and he's got quite a unique story. You may have heard on Mother's Day the story of this lady, this 32-year-old woman from Ottawa, who went into a house that she'd made some kind of contact with this woman over Facebook, I believe, and showed up at her house and bear sprayed the parents and tried to snatch their 8-day-old baby right from her arms. And luckily some neighbors were nearby and were able to stop her before she got away, and the police came and so on. But just a crazy, crazy story. Well, we're looking at Moses this week, and his story of birth is also pretty fascinating and scary at the same time. You probably are aware of the story, but in case you're not, Moses was born at a time when the Pharaoh of the day was felt threatened by the population of the Hebrew people of the day. They'd become very numerous in the land. And God, of course, was prospering them, and the Pharaoh became a little bit scared that they were going to kind of take over because of their numbers. And so he had actually ordered that all of the baby boys be thrown into the Nile River. And I just couldn't imagine that sight, seeing all these babies 2 and under thrown into the Nile River, and how that must have just been such a devastating experience for these Hebrew people. But of course, we also learn in the story that, prior to that, the Pharaoh had ordered that all the Egyptian boys, when they're being born, that the midwives would kill them before they're born. And the Bible recounts a couple women by the name of Shua and Pua, I think it is. I had it written down here somewhere. Shifra, and Pua. 2 names that I would never name my children, but there they are in the Bible. And interestingly enough, their names actually, both of them, have the meaning of beautiful. And incidentally, Moses also was called a beautiful child. When they looked at Moses when he was born, they looked on him and thought, oh, he's beautiful. Now, I don't know if it meant literally he was beautiful in the physical sense, or that there was something special about this baby Moses. And I don't know what the connection might be, if anything, but there you have it. So these 2 midwives, they refused to kill these babies. And then the Pharaoh came to them and said, what's going on here? I thought I ordered you to kill all these Hebrew boy babies. And they give the story that, well, Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They give birth and they just kind of come out before we get there, and nothing much we can do. And so God honored that. But then because of this, Pharaoh got angry and he ordered that all these babies be thrown into the Nile River. Well, so his parents, by faith, it says in the passage of Scripture we're going to read in Hebrews 11, it says, by faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child. The King James Version says a proper child. Some translations say beautiful. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. So they had a measure, they had faith of their own. Verse 24 says, by faith Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So this was around the age of 40. And he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered or endured because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. So that kind of gives you, the passage of Scripture referring to Moses in Hebrews 11. Getting back to the story, his parents, by faith, put him out in a basket. In one sense, they did obey the order. They put him into the Nile River, but in a basket made of reeds, and it was coated with pitch, very similar to the way it's described as Noah's Ark, which was also coated with pitch and placed in the water. And of course, the people in the ark were saved, and Moses was placed in the basket, hoping that someone was going to rescue him from the water. And sure enough, as his sister is following along, watching what will happen to Moses in the basket, lo and behold, Pharaoh's daughter comes down, and she draws him out of the water. I think that's significant because, well, that Moses' name actually means to draw out. And so she picks him out of the water, and Moses' sister comes along and says, do you want me to go and find someone to nurse the baby? And Pharaoh's daughter had compassion on him and said, yes, please go find someone. And so, of course, she takes her back to his very own mother, who nurses him. And so Moses becomes under Pharaoh's own household. And so Pharaoh's very decree to kill all these baby boys, while one of them ends up in his own household, and his own mother is being paid to nurse her own child. This is just how God turns things around for his people. It's just quite an amazing story. But I want to break this message down into 3 parts. And the reason I want to do that is because Moses' life is divided into 3 parts. His entire life. He lived for 120 years and 40-year segments. So the first 40 years he grew up in Egypt. He grew up like an Egyptian. He learned the customs, the traditions, the gods that they worshipped. Not to say that he worshipped those gods, but he was certainly aware of who they were and all the rituals and so on. The second 40 years was just after Moses fled from Egypt after murdering the Egyptian, and he flees to Midian, where he spends another 40 years as a shepherd. And then the final 40 years after the burning bush incident with God, where God calls him back into Egypt to bring out his people, to draw them out, if you will, basically takes it from that point right till he takes the Israelites right to the edge of the promised land. Of course, Moses doesn't enter into the promised land. God wouldn't let him for this one incident where he was talking about getting water from the rock, and he was supposed to speak to the rock. Instead, he struck the rock. That's a whole other story. But anyway, it's divided into three different segments. And so I want to look at each segment of his life briefly, And I've kind of labeled them sin as the first 40 years, faith as the next 40 years, and then mission as the last 40 years. Because I think that each one of us, we kind of fall into one of those categories, don't we? I mean, we're all born into sin. That's a given. Moses was no different. And, he grew up in the Egyptian way of things. And so he basically grew up in a place that was full of sin. Is kind of known for its excessive luxuries and the sinful behavior, the mistreating of people, and of course with the Hebrew people in specific. They were really, just the idea of sin in their lives was so predominant. And so Moses struggles with this because he knew that he was not an Egyptian by blood. Some people say that he was probably around the age of 3 before he actually was transferred over into Pharaoh's household. I don't know if that's the case or not, but his mother certainly would have taught him who he really was whenever she had opportunity to. And of course, one other very obvious reason that he would know that he was Hebrew is every time he took a bath, he would recognize that he was circumcised, and that was the tradition of the Hebrews. And so he knew that he was not an Egyptian. And so that feeling of angst within him, I believe, was brewing within him for a number of years as he struggled to find his true identity in who he really was and what he was meant to do. The Bible said he was no ordinary child. I believe that God's persuasion upon Moses helped him to realize that he was meant for something more than just being in Pharaoh's household and enjoying the status that he was given at that time. And so the place of sin is one that we're all accustomed to. We're all born into sin. We all start out at that point in our lives, and we all have to discover our identity at some point in our lives. As we're growing up as children, we try and figure out, who am I? You try to find your way in the world, and you try to kind of create an identity for yourself, and you're trying to figure all that out. So we're still sinners, and we're seeking to find our true identity. Now, if you've come to that place as the divine persuasion of God draws you unto himself, what will our response be? God is continually pursuing us, each of us. And what is our response to that? Will you choose a life with the pleasures of sin that are here today and gone tomorrow, the fleeting pleasures of sin as it talks about in Hebrews? Or will we choose to identify with the sufferings of Christ? And so Moses chooses exile over lifestyle. He chooses to identify with God's people over his luxurious lifestyle living in Pharaoh's temple. And that brings us to the second phase of his life as he encounters or witnesses an Egyptian mistreating one of his people, a Hebrew. And of course he intervenes and he beats the Egyptian and ends up killing him and buries him in the sand, looking around, make sure that no one has taken notice of what he's done. Except that something happened again on another occasion, and then they say, "What?" He says, "Why are you fighting against each other?" I think it was two Hebrews at this point, and Moses says, or one of the guys says, "Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" And then, of course, Moses realizes that someone did see what happened. Maybe it was the Hebrew that he actually saved, told some others, and Moses flees for his life, and he goes to Midian. And I believe in this next 40 years of his life is kind of a turning point in his attitude, his behavior, and his outlook on life. You can imagine going from, this lifestyle to now fleeing for your life in the desert, not really knowing where you're going. I imagine he just kind of left right away with the clothes on his back. And, on his journey, I'm sure he was thinking over, like, is this what you called me to, God? Like, I don't even know where I belong anymore. I'm just kind of wandering around here in the desert. Like, what am I supposed to do now? I thought you wanted me to save these people, your people. And, I tried to do that, didn't go so well. And, I don't really know what was going through his mind, but I'm sure he was confused. But God began to do something in him. There's not a lot of detail that's given to us about sort of Moses' thought process or what he did on his way to Midian, how long it took him to get there. It was, some scholars say it was about 360 miles or so, maybe like 3 weeks journey if he kind of went straight there. But anyways, he shows up in Midian, and he comes to a well, and he's encounters 7 women that are feeding their flock, whose father is a priest, and some other shepherds come by, and they kind of kick the ladies out, and it's time for us to feed the sheep. You guys, take a hike. And Moses counters this, and he sees the injustice, and he intervenes, and he actually feeds or waters the sheep for them. He waters the flock for them. And the women go back and tell their father what had happened. And then they say, and then he says, bring him back. Bring Moses back. I want to meet him. And so he does that, and Moses builds a life there. He marries one of his daughters, and he starts building a life as a shepherd of sheep. Now, I believe this is also no accident. Of course, God prepared him and gave him all the tools that he needed when he became 80 years old and he went to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. He learned the customs and the ways of the Egyptians, and here as a shepherd, he's learning how to navigate his way through the desert and to take care of these sheep and so on. And so God is preparing him all this time. None of this time is wasted, even though Moses probably thought, I'm just going to live it the rest of my life as a shepherd, maybe. I don't know. But God doesn't waste anything, and he's preparing Moses the whole time. So I can't ignore the connection here, because Moses was drawn from the water as a boy, where his name, as I mentioned, comes from, and he was rescued at the beginning of his 40 years as a baby. Now, at the beginning of his second 40 years, he's drawing water for the flock. At the beginning of his last 40 years, he's parting the waters and delivering the people out of Egypt. So through all this, you can clearly see the deliverance of God's people and the increasing demise of the Egyptians who die by those very same waters of the Red Sea, just as he ordered the babies to be thrown in the river of the Nile. Those aren't the same bodies of water, but the body of water, the Nile that Pharaoh had ordered the babies to be thrown into, God kind of turned that around and destroyed Pharaoh's army at the Red Sea. Well, this brings us to my final point, which exemplifies the last 40 years of Moses' life about mission. It says in Hebrews 11:27, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered or endured because he saw him who is invisible. Seems like a contradiction, doesn't it? He saw him who is invisible. Well, what did Moses endure exactly? Well, he endured in his commitment to be identified with the Hebrew people and not be called an Egyptian. It would have been much easier for him at any point to kind of return back to his old lifestyle. And yet, perhaps he sealed the deal when he killed the Egyptian. He feared for his life and didn't want to go back. But I get the sense that he never had intentions. He didn't ever want to go back to that old way of life. And I think he really believed that God had called him to be a deliverer of his people. Exodus 3:1 says that Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, if you know this mountain, this is the same mountain that God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses on. And here he is with the flock, with the sheep that he's taking care of. Little did he know that sometime later, not sure exactly how much time it took, but he would bring God's flock out from Egypt and lead them as well. It's just a beautiful picture. I believe it was about 6 years, by the way, that it took. So here he is with the actual sheep as maybe it's part of his training, I suppose, as later he would bring the Israelites out and he would have to feed them and water the people as well, find water for them and food. At least the sheep didn't talk back, though. He took a lot of flack, Moses did, through the 40 years that he dealt with them. But anyhow, so now we come to the burning bush incident. And Moses is keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Of course, this is, he's got the sheep with him. He's looking after them, watering them. And he sees this bush that is a fire but not burning. And he says, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And he goes a little closer, and a voice comes from the midst of the bush saying, Moses, Moses. And he says, here I am. And God says, take off your shoes, for the place you're standing is holy ground. And this becomes Moses calling into mission to partner with God in bringing his people out of Egypt. And Jesus wants to partner with us too. And Moses, I think there was about 10 instances or excuses why Moses felt he wasn't the right guy for the job to do such a thing. And God knew exactly what he was doing. He had Moses. It says Moses was the humblest man in all the earth, and God used all of this time, his time in Egypt, his time in the desert, his time in Midian as a shepherd. He used all of that basically to humble Moses, and to the point where he could be used by God. He's stripped of any pride, and Moses says, well, I'm not a man of, I get tongue-tied. Some people think he stuttered. And so God, still wanted him to do it, but he gave him Aaron, his brother, his older brother, to be his voice for him. And so God is able to use him to do something incredible, even though Moses feels in his own self that he doesn't really have what it takes. And when we first came here to Kempville, the time leading up to that, it was only maybe 3 months by the time that I really felt God calling me into ministry until we were actually here working. It happened rather fast, which is really unusual, the way things work in the Army. But I felt inadequate too. I felt like I didn't have what it took to be a pastor of a church, to lead God's people. How could I do that? I was a builder. I didn't really have any formal training as a speaker or a leader in this sense. And I really felt like I didn't have what it took either. And yet God called me, and I went. And the only thing that I can boast about was that I had the courage to follow God's calling, right? Because we can't boast in something we don't have. And I at the time I really felt I didn't have what it took. And anyways, here I am today, going on our 9th year up here, and I just feel so blessed that God has called me to this. And it's doing ministry like this, it is such a blessing to know that we're helping people and we're leading them to the Lord. What greater calling in my mind is there than to be a pastor of God's people, God's flock. Anyhow, I digress. The point I want to make is that God will use your time in Egypt. What is your Egypt experience? Perhaps it's a life, growing up you were into drugs or alcohol, or maybe, you were abused, what have you. God can use all of that. We might think that, I've wasted my youth and I can't I can't be used by God. I've just wasted all these years, and what do I have to offer God? God often calls us to the very thing that we struggle with, doesn't he? I remember struggling. I was in architecture school, and I had to I thought, if I go to architecture school, I can just sit there and do my drawings and not have to do a whole lot of public speaking, that sort of thing. Well, as I get there, every week we're presenting our work before the class and our peers and the professors. And so that kind of foiled my plan there, but God was preparing me. He was preparing the way for what he knew was going to come down the road, and he used all of that for his purposes, and he can do the same for you. No matter what your upbringing is, God can use all of that experience, all of those struggles that you faced in your life for his purpose, if you will just allow him to. And don't look back. We don't want to look back to Egypt and go back there. We're called to go forward, to press on toward the goal. It's ironic that the first generation of Israelites that Moses led out of Egypt, they just wanted to go back to Egypt. They were out in the desert wandering around, and they thought, we had it so good back there in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die and to thirst to death? And all we got is this manna to eat. There's no McDonald's or Starbucks, right? But they wanted to go back. They didn't have the endurance that Moses had, and as a result, God wouldn't let them enter into the promised land, not that generation. They had all died off except for Caleb and Joshua were the only two who were allowed to go over into the promised land. They would rather have lived a comfortable lifestyle, or so they thought, back in Egypt. But the reward was in the relationship for Moses. That was the real reward, was the relationship with God, his presence. He didn't want to move anywhere unless the presence of God went with him. Well, I don't know where you see yourself today in these three stages of Moses' life. Maybe you're still trying to figure out this whole God thing. You're trying to reconcile, is this legit? Is this real? Is it just a bunch of crazy people that believe in God? But I believe that through the divine persuasion of God, he's working on each of you. If you're listening to this today, I know that God is speaking to you directly. He's trying to persuade you that he is who he says he is. He's the great I am. Maybe you're feeling that angst within your spirit, that your gut is just telling you that something's not right. You see the injustice in the world and you want to do something about it. Of course, the temptation of Moses was to just step in his own strength and solve the issue. And of course, that didn't work out very well for Moses. But the journey of faith is one that requires endurance. As Eugene Peterson once put it, I wrote a book on it, a long obedience in the same direction. And Jesus himself said, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit to be my disciple." It requires endurance. I want to leave you with a benediction from 1 Peter that I think kind of ties this all in together really well. It says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him, and though you do not see him now, you believe in him, and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Doesn't that just tie everything in so beautifully? I wonder if you just bow your heads with me as we close in prayer. God, we thank you today for people like Moses, the example that you've given us of his enduring faith. And through these different stages of his life, where he was lived a life very close up, he could see the sinfulness of idolatry and the oppression of people and the sinfulness that abounded everywhere in Egypt. And within his own heart, he knew that there was something more. He knew that you had called him to something. By your persuasion, he knew that there was something more meant for his life, and you called him to a life of faith and to work that out within his own spirit and to follow you. And you taught him how to guide sheep and through his experience as a shepherd. And you gave him everything that he needed to live the life you called him to, so that he was prepared when it came time to be called into mission. And God, you've prepared each one of us for service as well. And you've said that the workers are few and the harvest is plenty. God, would you give us an enduring faith like Moses? There are people all around us in need of a shepherd, someone to point them to Jesus. God, give us a heart like Moses for his people. Give us humility and give us the courage to have that enduring faith, God, we pray. In your precious name we ask it. Amen. Well, I hope this encourages you today. I know as I prepared for this, it challenged my own heart. And, God bless you, and we hope you'll tune in again next week. Take care.
And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and